the controlling class is not interested in having people understand this because, first of all, this leads to the causal factors, the understanding of the causal factors about why humanity is in the current conditions that we're in. Many people will have no answer for that. They don't understand the causal factors.
I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 17th of March, 2019. There's another one too, it's from India as well, about the aluminum they're finding in the soil from the geoengineering. If I can find that too, I'll put that one up as well. A good, interesting study. Again, it's not a makeshift thing, it's well done. And of course, we know the one side. Necessity, so you've got to save the planet, so you've got to be right. Don't complain, it's necessity. And just take their word for it that climate change is what they say it is. It's interesting if you understand, if you get a vehicle and it's a fairly new model of something, a motorbike or a car, whatever it happens to be, you'll start to see, when you see the same model passing. Now, you can be driving for years, but you never saw that, you never noticed that thing before until you get one yourself, that particular model yourself. And then I start noticing that it's the same thing when it comes to climate, because you just accept things. It isn't until a big problem is made of it that you actually notice anything. So it can sound, oh my God, terrifying, eh? My God, I didn't realize it was going to rain today. Oh, I didn't get my raincoat with me. Oh, goodness me. But it's true. So don't forget the articles I read years and years ago too, from all the top NGO groups that are financed to propagandize us into existence, to terrify us. Actually say in their own articles, the leaders and the CEOs of these groups and so on, and government departments, that we always put out scary, terrifying scenarios because the public won't take notice otherwise. You see? That's what you do. I'll put something like the SPICE project, stratospheric particle injection for climate engineering. I'll put that up too. And they've got different universities, the University of Bristol, University of Cambridge, University of Oxford, and University of Edinburgh. And they began a collaboration in 2010, because that's what they use our tax money for as well, to brainwash us, you know. And the characters they use are departments now for, it's, ecological departments and so on, because that's where the big money is going to be from the taxpayer. And they talk about the project, what are the aims of the project, and how they're going to achieve the SPICE project. Well, what does it involve? There's got three parts that they break it down to, and geoengineering and governance, you see. What is geoengineering and how is it governed, right? Well, it's not by the public, that's for sure. We just breathe it in and do what we're told. But that's what they give you, isn't it? That's exactly what they give you. And another one too, stratospheric Wellsback seeding for reduction of global warming. United States patent, and it's got the number in it here and all the rest of it. I think it's 5,003,186. And that was from 1991, this US patent, this particular one. So there's, there's lots of it there, because whenever you see something emerging, they've been planning that an awful long time ago, actually. And here's an article to go with it. Welcome to Climate Geoengineering Governance, a research project which aims to provide a timely basis for the governance of geoengineering through robust research on the ethical, legal, social and geopolitical implications of a range of geoengineering approaches. Well, there you go, eh? But is it democratic? Do you get any say in it? No. And it's got all the different universities again here too. And the LWEC, it says, publishes Geoengineering Policy and Practice Note. Living with environment change. There you go. And why won't the UK make the sun shine for the Olympics? That was 2012. BBC. With the British weather threatening to put a damper on the Olympic Games, why doesn't the government just make the sun shine? At the risk of sounding like a mad scientist, blah, blah, it can be done, in theory at least. The Chinese government seeded clouds ahead of the 2008 Olympics opening ceremony to create a downpour elsewhere and keep the stadium dry. And they told you how they did it. It's old stuff, actually. And they're using the old technique. But it's still effective. And it says it's also possible to over-nucleate clouds with many particles so that they hold in their moisture until they've passed over the target area, experts say. So you can carry it away as well. You can make it happen. You can disperse it if you want, and it won't rain. Or you can move it to where you want it to rain. This is old stuff. It says cloud seeding is used around the world to prevent fog at airports, to stop hail damage in the cities, or to boost snowfall at ski resorts. And on it goes. This is important here too. It says the UK has a checkered history with the technique. In 1952, it says 35 deaths in the Lynmouth flood disaster were linked at the time to RAF rainmaking experiments over southern England a few days earlier, although nothing was proved. Well, with Britain, whenever they do stuff like that, they never ever tell you the truth. They'll always deny it. But they were actually, it came out that they were doing the cloud seeding at the time to make it rain. Everything else they tested on the public was done clandestinely too, including the spraying by naval ships off the east coast. The spray went across the coast and they monitored a particular nasty substance that can be cancerogenic. And it was done with, again, impunity again. Nothing comes out of it except, oh well. They would never do anything to harm you, would they? Isn't it wonderful that the way they train us all? And the UN urged to freeze climate geoengineering projects, and that was 2010. The UN should impose a moratorium on geoengineering projects such as artificial volcanoes and vast cloud seeding schemes to fight climate change, Green Group says, fearing they could harm nature and mankind. It says the risks were too great because the impacts of manipulating nature on a vast scale were not fully known. They know it's going to kill us off, and they've been doing it. They know how many folk are coming down every year with terrible bronchial problems that often lead to death and recurrent infections and so on from it. Because once it makes the lining of your trachea and your bronchioles inflamed, and bacteria sets in over and over. They know this, so. And that's acceptable. The death rate is acceptable to get the agenda through. Because after all, you see, if there's too many alive, they claim, especially if they manage to breed more, so they claim, as they flood the West with more and more people. Because there's no satisfying them, obviously, through logic. If you'll breed, then there's going to be problems, they claim. That was the biggest problem that faced the world, according to all eugenicists, including Julian Huxley, quite open about it. Anyway, envoys from 200 countries gathered in Nagoya, Japan to agree targets to fight the destruction of forests and rivers and coral reefs that provide resources and services and so on at the time. But they said that, yeah, this stuff could have terrible effects on the public. They're actually more worried about what it'll have on animal life. Because they're greenies, eh? Here you go. They don't like humans too much. And developing an international framework for geoengineering. International organizations involved in it, and different universities, University of Maryland, Carnegie Mellon University, etc., etc., etc. All old stuff, but it's all still going on. There's just no end to it if you really care to look at it. And it's odd too, if you repeat the same stuff from their own side, you'll be called a conspiracy theorist. So it's all, as I say, that's instead of the aliens invading the earth, here's your enemy. The climate's fighting you and you're fighting the climate, so man's the problem. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, you gotta admit it. You gotta hand it to them. They understand psychology and how to put it across. It really is. You gotta admit it. Mind you, with endless tax money, all these different organizations and big foundation money too, and big paychecks for the CEOs of the NGO. They actually have huge buildings, some of them, these NGOs. We don't vote for any of them, but they decide policy for all of us. See, that's how you're really governed. Folk can't get their head around that. You think you're voting, and that's everything you have to do. But you don't get to vote for all these private organizations. That's how you're really governed, is through private organizations. Most folk are ignorant of, in fact. I'd like to just mention, too, something awfully important. And I've mentioned George Orwell many times. He's a bit of an enigma, the man. But he went off to fight for socialism against what he saw as really the fascist system. And he was very passionate about it. In his era, people had witnessed the massive marches to London for people who just to hand in big charts for people who were protesting utter poverty before World War II started. And the reason for it all was a massive taxation in an empire system where only this strange city of London and then maybe a couple of hundred families seem to profit from it all. Maybe a lot more than that, but not that much. People in the outskirts who help the empire, they profit awfully well. But the vast majority of the public pay for it all. They pay for the wars, they pay for infrastructure across the planet. In all the empirical countries, they pay for the railroads, they pay for the military. But they get nothing back from it except the bills. There you go, that's the truth of it. But that's what Orwell was really about too. And when he found out what real communism was, he says it's nothing like what he thought, his idea of what socialism would be. And so he became its enemy very quickly. Anyway, he says freedom of the press. And this was a forward in his book Animal Farm. If you think, you see, it's not new. Suppression and censorship is not new. It says the book was first thought of so far, the actual book, Animal Farm, as a central idea. It goes in 1937, but it's not written down until about the end of 1943. By the time when it came to be written, it was obvious that there would be great difficulty in getting it published in spite of the present book shortage, which ensures that anything describable as a book will sell, and in the event it was refused by 4 publishers, only one of these had any ideological motive. 2 had been publishing anti-Russian books for years, and the other had no noticeable political colour. One publisher actually started by accepting the book, but after making the preliminary arrangement, he decided to consult the Ministry of Information. The Ministry of Information is real. We all have departments of information, especially today, because we're under this strange terrorist thing. Terrorists just spontaneously come out of nowhere. And so we all are under your corporate type management, you see. Anyway, get back to the article. It says, so the Minister of Information appears to have warned him, at any rate, strongly advised him against publishing his book. And he gives an extract from his letter and so on. It says here, this is what the publisher got, I guess. I mentioned the reaction I had from an important official in the Ministry of Information with regards to Animal Farm. I must confess that this expression of opinion has given me seriously to think. I can now see that it might be regarded as something which it was highly ill-advised to publish at the present time. If the fable were addressed generally to dictators and dictatorships at large, then publication would be all right. But the fable does follow, as I see it now, so completely the progress of the Russian Soviets and their 2 dictators that it can apply only to Russia. So that was why they didn't want to publish it. The same thing happened, of course, with 1984, which was published, I think, in 1947-48. But this one here, Animal Farm, he wanted to get published during World War II, when, of course, they were in bed with the Soviet system. Don't think the Soviet system can't, forget the fact it was Russia, that system can be put anywhere. In fact, I think there's more communists were actually living in the US, right through that entire period, right up to the present time. And because you don't use the word communism anymore, doesn't mean that's not what they are. Often, it's so tragic that folk have to be given an actual name to identify something. If you don't get the name, you see, they don't think about it. And that's why those who control you use names awfully frequently. They label you, you see. And they can get you to try to hate somebody or whatever it happens to be, or a group, or you name it. That's what your governments do. Anyway, it says here that this is from from his own publisher. I think the choice of pigs as a ruling caste will no doubt give offence to many people, and particularly to anyone who's a bit touchy, as undoubtedly the Russians are. This kind of thing is not a good symptom. This is Orwell again. Obviously, it's not desirable that a government department should have any power of censorship except, and this is awfully important for folk who unfortunately we get overdosed with data every day, and most folk don't remember it. And that's why you have to be selective in your thoughts, and selective in what you're thinking, and selective in the topics. Everything else is just bubblegum. But back to his article, and he says, this is, obviously it's not desirable that a government department, this is Orwell, should have any power of censorship. It's not desirable that a government department should have any power of censorship. And he says, except security censorship, which no one objects to in wartime. See, this is what I said before. Well, now it's terrorism, you can't say that. See how we work you suddenly become like a super tribe, basically. It doesn't matter how many cultures are involved, you become a super tribe when you think you're under threat. Yeah, sure, yeah. You can ration me, you can do this, you can do that, okay. It says, over books which are not officially sponsored. But the chief dangers to freedom of thought and speech at this moment is not the direct interference of the Ministry of Information or any official body. If publishers and editors exert themselves to keep certain topics out of print, it is not because they are frightened of prosecution, but because they are frightened of public opinion. In this country, intellectual cowardice is the worst enemy a writer or journalist has to face, and that fact does not seem to me to have had the discussion it deserves. Any fair-minded person with journalistic experience will admit that during this war, official censorship has not been particularly irksome. We have not been subject to the kind of totalitarian coordination that might have been reasonable to expect. The press has some justified grievance, but on the whole, the government has behaved well, has been surprisingly tolerant of minority opinions. Except for the folk who didn't want the war, they locked them up, eh? The sinister fact about literacy censorship in England is that it is largely voluntary. So this is so important. Government likes you to go along voluntarily, but you know there'll be consequences if you don't. You see, that's what law is, actually. It's always coercion. There's always something about, you're kind of coerced along, you know. But if you say no, that's when you get force applied, you see. That's how it all works. You get punished or your license gets withdrawn for whatever it happens to be, you name it. Unpopular ideas can be silenced and inconvenient facts kept dark without the need for any official ban. Anyone who has lived long in a foreign country will know of instances of sensational items of news, things which on their own merits would get the big headlines, being kept right out of the British press, not because the government intervened, but because of a general tacit agreement that it wouldn't do, as I say, it wouldn't do to mention that particular fact. So far as the daily newspapers go, this is easy to understand, but British press is extremely centralized, and most of it is owned by wealthy men who have every motive to be dishonest on certain important topics. But the same kind of veiled censorship also operates in books and periodicals, as well as in plays, films, and radio. Understand what I'm saying before? It isn't just me saying that. Your propaganda is embedded as well, not just things kept out, but propaganda they want you to believe is put through children's books and movies and everything that you read. You don't realize how brainwashed you are, as you think you'll enjoy yourself. At any given moment, there is an orthodoxy, a body of ideas, which is assumed that all right-thinking people will accept without question. See? It's not exactly forbidden to say this, that, or the other, but it is simply not done to say it. Just as in mid-Victorian times, it was not done to mention trousers in the presence of a lady. You couldn't even say lady anymore. Anyone who challenges the prevailing orthodoxy finds himself silenced with surprising effectiveness. See, peer groups can be trained very quickly to turn against someone who is thinking outside the box. And they really do. People like to huddle together like penguins in their little groups and sects and whatever it happens to be. Remember the studies I read from, again, university studies on peer groups and propaganda and indoctrination. And they found the different groups from working classes and different men, women, and so on. And they found that the ones who were middle class, basically middle class, who socialized, they adapted to all new policies very quickly. And they'd talk about it with their drinky poos as they stood there and chatted to each other. And they'd all have the same books, the recent ones that were suggested. And suggestions, see, is like an order. Yeah, well, yes, I've got so-and-so's book, isn't it? Yeah. And you see, they've got all the right things, and etc. And they'll wear the right things, and all drive the same things, and yada, yada, yada. They're very conformist. So it's easy to manage them. Very easy. And when anything's said from professional bodies, they immediately parrot it without thinking. They'll never question it. The folk who had less education question things far, far more. So education domesticates you more and more and more until you can't retain any natural survival instincts. This is not my word. This is the studies that they've done, you see. But anyway, I'll get back to Orwell's little article here. He goes through the different parts of how different countries kept down free speech, etc., etc., etc. Well, look what's happening in all our countries today, where you've been told what to believe about everything it's turned everything upside down, and even they can put you in jail for not going along with what you're told to say. What you're told to say. or what you're told to call somebody. You're in trouble, folks. We're all in trouble here. This is a scientifically controlled society, if you haven't figured it out. Also, too, I've got a whole bunch of stuff, as I say. Geoengineering governance research. Oh, there's just too much of it, actually, on the regulation of geoengineering, international framework on geoengineering, and etc. It goes way, way back, all this stuff. It's too much to even go over. I've read it all, but most folk can't be bothered or don't have the time. Yeah. But that's what you're living through, is a massive system of control. And then you have, let me think, what else have I got here? Let's go back to a guy who definitely was hailed. They always give you your heroes, even though they're monsters, some of them. But it is interesting to read them and to remind yourself of things. People who really were part of what was called the world empire system. It's still on the go, big time. It's closer to than ever before. And Bertrand Russell, who talked about the impact of science on society. You got to try and remember, don't overdose yourself with data. So there's so much data, conflicting data thrown at you all the time. But understand what's important to you. Most folk won't care. They really have been domesticated, and they believe that, well, there's always specialists taking care of us. Well, when did that become part of democracy? Are specialists taking care of everything? Really? Is that why you're a perpetual child? You're being taken care of? Did you give her permission to have all your rights to take care of yourself taken away from you? Every statement demands a question. So here we have what he says, what Russell said, right? And his whole agenda too is there's too many of the wrong people, blah, 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 blah. Same thing. He says on page 50, he says, Fichte laid it down, the philosopher, that education should aim at destroying free will. I'll repeat that for the hard of thinking. Fichte said, or he laid it down, that education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable for the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. But in his day, this was an unattainable ideal. What he regarded as the best system in existence produced Karl Marx. I'd actually say it produced more than just Karl Marx. Here today, we're told that what you see isn't real. It's something else, and you better go along with it. Anyway, it says, in the future, such failures are not likely to occur where there is dictatorship. You see, you're really under a form of dictatorship. If you don't have a say in anything, and you better obey, and don't say what you think, and don't say what you see, you're forbidden to. You're not in a democracy, folks. So he says, really, it's a form of dictatorship. Of course it is. It doesn't matter if it's an oligarchy or whatever of scientists. It's still a dictatorship type of system. It is dictated to you, ordered, see? And then use diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that will become psychologically impossible. Even if all are miserable, all will believe themselves as happy, because the government will tell them that they are so. You're happy, aren't you? Look at all the ads on TV. Smiling faces everywhere. A totalitarian government with a scientific bent might do things to us would seem horrifying. Then he goes into the Nazis, who were eugenicists. They praised Britain, and they praised the US, and the Rockefeller boys and so on, and the Cold Springs Harbor, science labs, etc. And they used all their techniques that actually put them into effect openly, more openly, I'd say. And eugenics, of course. But says they were more scientific than the present rulers of Russia, and more inclined towards the sort of atrocities that I've said that I have in mind, he says. That I have in mind. This is, in other words, he's thinking of doing, right? So the Nazis were more inclined towards the sort of atrocities that I have in mind, he says. They were said, and I do not know how much truth is, to use prisoners in concentration camps as material for all kinds of experiments, some involving death after much pain. By the way, it's amazing how they always hammer Germany, even though the Germans copied it all, to say, from Britain, and the eugenicists and the Darwinian groups too. They're still on the go. The actual eugenics groups have changed their name, but they're still on the go. And the groups in America. It's just astonishing, isn't it? So the loser always gets hammered. And Julian Huxley had to reinvent the term for eugenics, because he didn't even hesitate to carry on with the whole eugenics agenda after World War II. So anyway, he says that the Soviets didn't have the same kind of scientific abilities or whatever, but he says that's what they would use. As you all think you're happy, because a totalitarian government will tell you so. Do you understand that you are in a sci-fi? If you haven't read Acres of Skin, you should read it. It's a modern book about all the prisoners used in American prisons and elsewhere for medical experiments, and they injected cancer cells and all kinds of things. It's quite the read for those that can handle it. And this is in so-called peacetime. So he talks about all this experimentation on humans in camps, some involving death after much pain. If they had survived, they would probably have soon taken to scientific breeding. Any nation which adopts this practice will, within a generation, secure great military advantages. I mean, they're talking about literally genetic manipulations and eventually what they used to call test tube babies, and then out of the womb children also. And it says here, a secure great military advantage. So you would create where do you, all those X-Files and stuff came from? I think just somebody made that up. It was about all the possibilities that scientists had envisaged long ago, as they sat around their big tables discussing things they could work towards. And how could they create the super soldiers? Lots of articles over many years about super soldiers, how to create a super soldier, and even how to take away their complete, any kind of fear they might have, just literally silence that part of the brain where fear resides in them, things like that. Remember, the whole point is to win for those who rule. So he talks about great military advantages, and I'll put up the article too about China. And that's been more open, I think, really, has gone ahead with a lot of this kind of testing of a purpose-made person, basically. And again, he'd gone forever with these. Just each area I'm talking about here is just almost endless with data now. But it says here, the system, one may surmise, will be something like this, except possibly in the governing aristocracy. All but 5% of males and 30% of females would be sterilized. This is the great Bertrand Russell, see? I mean, he was all for this kind of. The 30% of females will be expected to spend the years from 18 to 40 in reproduction in order to secure adequate cannon fodder. Breed youngsters for military, for war. As a rule, artificial insemination will be preferred to the natural method. And of course, Brave New World was already written before that, I think, before this book came out. And this is just one little excerpt from it, his book, Bertrand Russell, the great Bertrand Russell. The guy who literally said anyone who was selected to join the ruling groups of scientists, for instance, and who wouldn't leave if they're from a lower class, he's quite open about how he saw people. And if they wouldn't leave their own class behind them and families and become one of them, and meaning secrecy and working towards something, he said they'd have to be literally eliminated because they'd have the understanding of what's going on and the ability to communicate to other people. Russell was a vastly different person than again. Why do you think they make him such a hero? A hero for what? Because he was against nuclear war and so on? See, the elite always say there's too many people. These are the causes of war. That's what they say. It goes on and on and on. And it's well understood that the countries that were reducing their populations very successfully don't get any thanks for it. And your own governments that push it for years and years and generations opened up, the floodgates now to mass migration. So obviously, there's something else at work here, isn't there? Obviously. Of course there is. It's an old agenda. And they're rather open about it at the top. You're the problem, all of you. And they're dealing with it as far as they're concerned. Again, they take 10-year plans, 50-year plans, 100-year plans for different parts of their project. The UN does the same thing, if you notice. And of course, the Soviet system used the same technique for different aspects of their policies to be implemented. That's how it works. So you're living through an incredible system that the public have a hard time understanding because they are so brainwashed, incredibly well brainwashed. And you can do more effective brainwashing to a 5-year-old's mind by showing them videos altered of whatever it happens to be, or even deforestation, or a clear-cut thing that was done in the 1940s, and say, oh, this is what they've done yesterday, and they'll think that, oh my God, they're destroying nature, and the music's behind it, and there's a woman's voice generally narrating, soft and and the music comes on, and the music's bum, 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 and you're sitting chewing your fingernails, and that will never leave them. That imprint will always be there. And they'll do anything to save the planet because they just saw the whole planet didn't have a tree left on it, in this video. Just too easy. Emotional impact, using more senses than ever. They've talked to if they can add even the smell to a video, not just auditory and visual, things like that. It has more of a fixing of the impact in your mind. It fixes it in your mind. Anyway, I've prattled on a bit too much, and I didn't even want to go in that area. But it's still eugenics, as I say. Everything that's happening now is to do with eugenics and a big, big plan. It's very old. It's talked about quite openly in their own groups and clubs and so on. But as I say, whatever you're given for reality is nonsense. It's nonsense. You're never given the real reasons for anything. Never. Because you wouldn't be happy. And you might protest. And if you want to manage animals, you don't spook the animals, do you? A shepherd doesn't go in and say, I fancy some mutton tonight, and just grab one of the sheep in the pen there, and kill it in front of the rest of them. He'll try to get it out quietly as possible and far away from them. That's how you manage domesticated animals. It's quite easy. Anyway, hope I've been too depressing for you. Remember, you can buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com or donate to me, and you'll find out how to do it on my website. And remember, my websites are the official sites, and that's the only ones you can actually order from. Anyone else doing it, it's not my site at all. So for orders, definitely, or donations, definitely go to cuttingthroughthematrix.com, because I've had con people doing that before, using my name, and just do amazing things. It's quite a world we live in, isn't it? But there you are. So you can help me tick along by donating at least to cuttingthroughthematrix.com.